you've seen it, maybe in a dream, a murky, forgotten land.
Ever since Dark Souls 3 came out, people have been discussing whether or not Dark Souls 2 is now canon, because it seems to throw away a lot of the story and just doesn't seem like it's continuing it at all. This theory both plays on that idea and explains more than that idea. Keep in mind that I don't entirely subscribe to this idea. I just think it was a fun rabbit hole to go down and could provide answers and start discussion to provide better answers. In Dark Souls 3, we're introduced to something called the Deep. This is a brand new addition to the lore, though in-game it seems like it's been around for a long time, having its own cathedral dedicated to its worship, and eventually dedicated to sealing away its horrors. When Aldrich ruminated on the fading of the fire, it inspired visions of a coming age of the deep sea. This sounds like he's trying to drown the world, but maybe the deep is an entirely different world. In the Cathedral of the Deep, we find an evangelist purposefully facing away from us, staring out by a balcony. Looking out where she was, you can see a black hole, textured to appear as a liquid. JSF, in his video titled The Bastard's Curse, proposes the idea that this black body of water could be the deep. Judging from Aldrich's boss room being a dark liquid similar to this, it seems like he's trying to make this the natural state of the world through unnatural means. Now let's talk about Dark Souls 2. In Dark Souls 2, it's repeatedly driven home that the NPCs don't seem to remember how they got to Drangleic or why they're there, but we remember. We just have to consider something that most people don't take as anything more than a metaphor. The opening cinematic. We're being told about Drangleic by an old handmaiden. She says we'll find ourselves before its decrepit gate without knowing why. It then cuts to us rowing across dark waters toward a stone structure that is now a ruin. Perhaps this was once the gate that she was referring to. We are then shown walking towards a tree. It's possible that this is a white birch tree, which are prominent in Dark Souls 3, one in notable proximity to the deep, being just outside the cathedral. But an idea I like more is that this is a tree that's been filled with curses, much like what we're told happened to the curse-rotted Greatwood, and what seems to be happening to the burning tree where we find the first evangelist. This is secondary, but could play on my next point. As we get closer to the tree, we can see that it's covered in insects that seem to be fireflies. They seem to be drawn to the tree, perhaps the curse is stored within it, just as they are drawn to us, some beginning to flock to us and crawl on our skin. These seem to make an appearance later in game. Within the Shrine of Amana, we hear a song, and then the enemies are surrounded by these insects, rendering them passive, but when the singing stops, they aggro. The Malfinito explains this.
When we sing, the little ones dance. The little ones grant comfort to those who bear death and dark. This is what we were taught.
Could these be the same insects as Arena mentions?
The dark surrounds me, nibbles at my flesh. Little creatures, they never stop biting. Only, they frighten me so. The little creatures that nibble at me in the darkness.
These seem to be the creatures described in the Gnaw miracle. These insects which lurk in the deep have tiny jaws lined with fangs to tear open the skin and burrow into the flesh in the blink of an eye, causing intense bleeding. These creatures could be corrupted versions of the little ones found in the shrine, for we know from the Deep Protection miracle that the deep was once a sacred and peaceful place, then became the final rest for abhorrent things. Then something happens to where the moon turns red and the little ones swarm. It seems as though we disturb the sanctity of this place. The next clip is a very quick shot beneath the water, showing that it is extremely shallow and filled with skeletons, again, much like Aldrich's boss room. Next, the water shows a reflection of what the gate used to be, perhaps hinting at a metaphor that the true way to enter Drangleic is through the water. The gate opens, and then dark apparitions seem to escape and begin to fly. Take note of how these apparitions appear. Our character then approaches the water to find what seems to be a whirlpool. Notice how thick and dark the water is, how it seems to be open like a black hole. Remember that before, the water was shallow and filled with corpses. Again, much like Aldrich's boss room, this can be compared to how he opens up whirlpools to teleport. We're then shown a mark on our character's back. At the time, it was implied that this was the dark sign, but we know from Dark Souls 1 and 3 that the dark sign looks like this. What seems to be a scarring spread along the front of the ribcage with no significant marking on the back. So it seems in retrospect of Dark Souls 3 that this seems to more accurately fit the description of what's called the Dark Sigil. A black gaping hole in the flesh that resembles the brand of an undead. The darkness of humanity seeps from this bottomless pitch-black hole, the gap filled by the accumulation of the curse. It seems when humanity is seeping and accumulates enough of the curse, it begins to look like this. This growth eventually bursts the creature of what we later find out is called the pus of a man. We are then shown our character standing near the ledge. This is reminiscent of the description of Doris's gnawing in Dark Souls 3, which says, "Those who linger too long on the brink of the deep will often slip." Like I said before, pay attention to how the souls look, how they circle the air, very similar to the deep souls the deacons of the deep conjure before unleashing the curse on you. Now there is a lot of information I couldn't get to in this video because of the limits of Share Factory, but depending on the response of this video or lack thereof, I'm willing to make a follow-up. And I should explain again that I know this is far-fetched and it's more likely that Dark Souls 2 really doesn't matter, but like I said, there's a lot of things I didn't get to, like the Drang set, the mirror references, and what I think is outside of the deep in Dark Souls 2. I should finish by saying that I don't think that Drangleic was always in the deep. I think that something happened to where it succumbed to the deep.
The king had a dear queen, a woman of unparalleled beauty. Long ago, the queen came to us, alone, from a faraway land. She warned our lord of the looming threat across the seas, of the giants. The king crossed the ocean and defeated the giants with the queen at his side. The queen brought peace to this land and to her king. A peace so deep, it was like